Good afternoon. My name is Randall Johnson. I'm Interim Vice Provost for International Studies and head of the International Institute here at UCLA. On behalf of UCLA and the International Institute, I would like to welcome all of you here today for a lecture at the UCLA School of Law. I especially welcome the Honorable Dan Mirador, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Intelligence and Atomic Energy of the State of Israel. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, it's a privilege to have you on campus, and we thank you for taking the time out to visit UCLA and speak to our community. Visits from world and regional leaders, such as Deputy Prime Minister Mirador, contribute to a broader understanding of international affairs and offer invaluable opportunities for students, faculty, and the public to learn from influential leaders and to engage with the world beyond Los Angeles and the U.S. UCLA, a global university and a global city, welcomes the diverse perspectives and opinions that such leaders bring. The opportunity to hear their voices and to interact with them is part of what makes UCLA a world-class university. Today's program thus has great significance for UCLA and for the UCLA International Institute and its mission of connecting our students with the world and educating tomorrow's leaders. The UCLA International Institute is home to 22 multidisciplinary research institutes and centers that study world regions and global issues, preparing students for the 21st century. One of the sponsors of today's event is the International Institute's newest center, the Yunus and Soraya Nazarian Center for Israel Studies, which is an important addition to international studies at UCLA. The center supports innovative scholarship and exceptional instruction about Israel for students of all backgrounds, and it brings diverse public voices to our campus and the greater Los Angeles community. Founded in 2005 as a UCLA Israel Studies program, it became a fully endowed center this year thanks to the generosity of the Yunus and Soraya Nazarian Family Foundation. Yunus Nazarian, Sharon Baradaran are here with us this afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge them and thank them for this support. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Institute's Center for Middle East Development and the UCLA School of Law. I'm now pleased to introduce Aryeh Sapoznik, who is a historian of Zionism and Jewish nationalism. Dr. Sapoznik joined UCLA last year and is now first director of the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies. Aryeh?
Thank you, Randall, and welcome. It is truly a pleasure and an honor to be hosting the Deputy Prime Minister, Dan Mirador, today. And I'm thankful to all our co-sponsors, and particularly to the law school, which has provided the setting. Randall mentioned that I'm a historian, and I will confess and make a few quick comments about historical context about this talk. 63 years ago today, on November 29th, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly voted to partition Palestine into two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. That decision transformed decades of diplomatic, political, legal, and other efforts undertaken by the Zionist organization from those of a national movement to those of a henceforth internationally recognized state in the making. One tangible effect of the 1947 partition resolution was to place the Jewish community of Palestine on a new and virtually unprecedented legal and political footing. There are many accounts of the impact of these events, of Jews in Palestine and around the world glued to the live radio broadcast of the General Assembly vote. Amos Oz recounts the combination of initial shock coupled with a sense of historicity that overtook his childhood Jerusalem neighborhood that night. As the counting of the votes was concluded and the resolution was declared to have passed, he writes, the sound of the radio, quote, was swallowed up in a roar, a cataclysmic shout, a shout that could shift rocks, that could freeze your blood. And the next moment, the scream of horror was replaced by roars of joy. As Oz also recounts, on the foothills of that shout of primal joy came war. Today, over 6 decades later, in thinking about questions of law and politics in the Middle East conflict, UN General Assembly Resolution 181, the resolution that partitioned Palestine in 1947, or would have partitioned Palestine, continues to play important historical, legal, and political roles. In addition to constituting one of the international legal bases for the creation of the State of Israel, Resolution 181 has been a focus of ongoing legal debate and political contestation. It has also stood at the center of many of the efforts to find some resolution to the conflict, and we can hope that it may yet become the basis for such a resolution. These are matters that I expect we may learn more about in the coming minutes. A few ground rules about the coming minutes. Following the minister's talk, there will be time for questions from the audience. Please keep your questions brief and focused. Questions and debate are what a university forum is about. Please remember, however, that this means respectful debate, respect for our guest speaker, and respect for other audience members. This is not a forum for lectures. There is only one lecturer on the schedule today, and we will certainly not tolerate tirades. After being recognized, I'll do the recognizing. Audience members will be allowed a minute, 60 seconds, to formulate a question. And if there's no question forthcoming by about second 57, I will simply move on to the next person in line. Now, with that being said, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dean of the UCLA Law School, Rachel Moran, who will introduce our speaker. A distinguished scholar and teacher, Dean Moran assumed the position of Dean at the UCLA School of Law just this past October, coming to us from UC Berkeley, just a little bit up the coast. Welcome, Dean Moran, and thank you for hosting us here today.
It is a great privilege as the new dean at UCLA School of Law to be introducing Dan Mirador, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Intelligence and Atomic Energy. He is a graduate of the Faculty of Law at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and Deputy Prime Minister Mirador served as Minister of Justice from 1988 to 1990, and again from 1990 to 92. He was Minister of Finance from 1996 to 1997. He has been a longtime champion of the rule of law and civil rights in Israel. In fact, he is an important figure in what is called Israel's constitutional revolution. In particular, during his tenure as Minister of Justice, Mirador spearheaded the drafting of legislation that became Israel's basic law of human dignity and liberty and basic law of freedom of occupation. These two basic laws, taken together, are roughly equivalent to what we call our Bill of Rights. Deputy Prime Minister Mirador also has long been involved in issues of national security and foreign affairs. From 1999 to 2001, he served as chair of the Knesset Committee on National Security and Foreign Affairs. In addition to these ministerial posts, he has served as chair of the Jerusalem Foundation, an international nonprofit organization whose goal is the improvement of the quality of life for all citizens of Jerusalem. Please join me in welcoming Deputy Prime Minister Dan Mirador.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in LA, although it took me some 20 hours to fly from Tel Aviv all the way. I landed about 3 hours ago, but I'm happy to be here at UCLA and the Faculty of Law. I have had all sorts of posts I had in my life, but deep down I am a lawyer, and I do see the law as something that is not separate from life, but it is guiding life. And in my time as Minister of Justice, I tried to do that, human rights being quite high in my priority list. This is a pleasure to be here. I'll try to touch quite briefly on 3 topics that are, I believe, of interest to you. One of them at least has to do with law and life, or law and defense, international law in that case, and the new paradigm of war that we are seeing. But I'll try to put things into a broader perspective, which I think is important. We live today in modern era, in a time where we take our news from the screen and we have no more than 2 or 3 minutes for a topic, and the next day something else comes up, and we sometimes tend to zoom in so much that we forget the context. And I try briefly to put things into a historic context. One historic context was mentioned by Ari Sapoznik just recently. As he said, 63 years ago, a resolution was taken by the United Nations General Assembly, and it was about creating 2 states in Palestine. One a Jewish state, as it says, and the other an Arab state. Our response was positive. Theirs was negative. Had they responded positively, we might have had today a Palestinian state neighboring Israel, 63 years old. Just think of how different history would have been had they accepted this resolution, but they haven't, and here we are today. I think that, put in the right perspective, one can think of 2 main trends that we see in the Arab-Israeli conflict. One is positive, the other is not. Starting from a basic asymmetry between us and our neighbors, they are so much bigger than we are in terms of territory and number of people and so forth, that they were not illogical when they thought that in the end they will have the upper hand. The asymmetry is really vast. But it so happens that 43 years ago, the 6 Days War has changed dramatically the image of Israel from being a very fragile and indefensible state to a defensible state, a strong neighbor in the Middle East. And then from this time on, there began a positive trend that people usually call a peace process. I would term it the acceptance of Israel into the Middle East. After that war, we saw Egypt and Jordan, 2 main countries, one with the longest border with us, Jordan, the other the biggest, strongest Arab country, Egypt, accepting Israel, signing peace treaty with Israel. This is for us a major development. If you think of the wall of hatred and animosity around us, belligerent animosity, I have to say, to be able to take out from this war these 2 main bricks was a success story. So it was Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat that did the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty in the 70s. It was Yitzhak Rabin and King Hussein of Jordan who signed the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan in 1994. In the meantime, we saw the Oslo Agreement trying to reach, or to bridge gaps between us and the Palestinians, not so successfully, but in that direction. And we saw many more Arab countries who accepted Israel, if not formally, de facto. I cannot overlook the fact that what we heard yesterday in the news about WikiLeaks shows that there may be a gap between what some of our neighbors say publicly and what they say privately. So as they all speak of Iran as their brother or sister, what they said intimately to America you just heard. But regarding us, many more countries than would admit it publicly have better relationship with us. North African countries, Morocco, Tunisia, Gulf states. So this is a very positive trend. We saw more and more countries coming to terms with Israel. We are not anymore isolated in the Middle East. But I have to say that, as always in life, there is another trend as well. The other trend may have to come from the same development. The development was that Israel was strong. Unfortunately, it's not that they saw the light and they thought that we are right. Unfortunately, it's just our might or our strength that brought them into a realpolitik approach, Egypt, Jordan, and so forth. Others who understood that we are quite defensible moved the conflict to 2 other layers. One above conventional, mainly nuclear, The other below conventional, terror and guerrilla. On the nuclear thing, we saw Iraq. Our Air Force took care of this in 81. Then the American and British armies took care of this again in 91. Iraq is off that track. Then Libya was trying to get nuclear, and the Americans and British took them out by carrots and stick, as it's usually termed. Now I have to be cautious and say, according to foreign sources, Syria was trying to get nuclear with a North Korean nuclear reactor, and according to the same foreign sources, the Israeli Air Force took care of that. We see Iran trying to get nuclear now. So it's a new trend, and it is of significance. I'll come to it in a minute. The other trend has to do with the role of terror and guerrilla. Now, terror has been with us since day one of humanity. People were killing people, unfortunately, Cain and Abel, and then from that day on. But something changed in the modern era, in what people may call the globalization era or the technological era. It is the empowerment of the individual. People are very, very capable of doing things individuals could never do in history. Good things and bad things. Tom Friedman of the New York Times, in a book that he wrote some 10 years ago about globalization, called The Lexus and the Olive Tree, coined the term the super empowered individual. People can do much more. Countries cannot limit what people know, what people do. Borders are less important in many ways. He saw it positively. Negative side of it is that individuals, organizations, can do a lot of damage. In the old world, thousands of years of history, it used to be countries fighting countries, kings fighting kings. Individuals were less important. The Soviet Union was an empire, if you like. They spent hundreds of billions of dollars or rubles on an army, couldn't kill one American soldier, and collapsed because they couldn't have the money for this. In steps Mr. Bin Laden, spends several millions of dollars, see what damage he caused, not a state, an organization. The first time we saw this, when I was young, the organization was called Spectra. It was the James Bond movies, something we thought was science fiction organization fighting Great Britain. But the British were quite smarter than the Americans, because Sean Connery was quite young, couldn't do the job. Now he's somewhat older, he cannot do it, so America attacks Iraq, Afghanistan. Bin Laden is of course free. It's a new paradigm. People, organizations can do a lot of damage, more than ever in history. And it has to do with us as well, with organizations called Hezbollah or Hamas or Al-Qaeda or Jihad, things that we never saw in history. So you see these two trends around us. And when it comes to what happens now on the ground, you see a rhetoric that we never heard since '67. The elimination of Israel shouldn't exist, coming from the mouth of leaders, namely the Iranians, Hezbollah and Hamas, and adding a new element that we never heard in the Arab-Israeli conflict, a religious element. It's not a national conflict, it's a religious conflict for them. They say it's the word of God that there shouldn't be a non-Muslim state here. So say the Iranians, so say the Hezbollah leaders, so say the Hamas leaders. This is a dangerous development, of course. You know, people can compromise. Gods never do. Jewish, Christian, Muslims, God is truth. If it's God's word, how can you find a solution? It makes the conflict somewhat harder. So what we see now is the trend that we saw of developing more acceptance and understanding, and the other trend that is quite dangerous of going back to destruction of Israel, this time trying to get nuclear on one hand and using terror and terror organization on the other hand. I'll speak now on three topics. One is Iran in that context, the other is the Palestine-Israeli conflicts in that context, and the third is to do with the new paradigm of law and the new paradigm of war. What do we do with that? I would say that the most important conflict that develops now before our eyes in the world is the conflict or the standoff between Iran and the United States and the West on the nuclearization of Iran. if in the end of this conflict, Iran gets nuclear, in spite of what America says and wants, this will have grave implications on the balance of power in the world, on the role of America in the world. The first impact will be on the non-proliferation treaty regime. For 5 or 6 decades, there is this regime of non-proliferation, and it works okay. It's quite clear now that if Iran gets nuclear, other countries will become nuclear. Egypt says so, the Saudis indicated, and others. This is a different ballgame altogether. If you have mushrooming countries with nuclear military power, the change of paradigm is such that you won't anymore have the superpowers, the responsible adults dealing with the kids who don't play it right. This is a dangerous world, much less controllable. The second implication has to do with what we saw just recently from the WikiLeaks, but we know it for years now. The Arab regimes have built their survival for decades on their relationship and alliance with the United States. In return for access to oil and influence on the oil market that America has, which is quite important, America saved them, helped them survive against communist attempts, against fundamentalist and radical attempts for many years. This alliance was shaken 31 years ago in Iran when the Shah was led to fall, and they were quite trembling. What's going to happen here? But this is over. 31 years have passed. They look now up to America. Don't let Iran be hegemonic here, because Iran is not another state. Iran has a revolution exploitation policy, and they want to change the regimes in the Arab world. It's interesting that I mentioned earlier that these countries who think that we have nuclear weapons, whether they are right or not, I cannot say, but they never threaten to develop their own against us. When Iran gets nuclear weapons, they say we'll get nuclear. Because we never threaten their regimes, Iran does. So if America cannot do it for them, this will change their relationship with the West. Some of them will get nuclear, some of them will have to go with Iran. It's again a change of the world order. If that part of the world with the oil in it will be under heavy Iranian influence. A third implication, if Iran gets nuclear, has to do with what I said earlier about those groups of terror like Al-Qaeda or Jihad or Hamas or Hezbollah or Taliban. All over the Muslim world, 1.4 billion people, a very large world, stretching from Afghanistan or Pakistan in the east all the way to North Africa in the west. Most people, vast majority, want to lead decent life and go about their life as everybody else. But in all those societies, there are small groups, minority groups, who want to destabilize the life that they have and want to revolutionize this way of life and get people back to radical religion. You see these movements that I mentioned all over the Muslim world. All of them look up at this Iran-America contest, and they want to see whether Iran can do it or not. If Iran can do it, America cannot get its will listened to. It's going to boost all those movements and destabilize a very important area of the world. Just think of how arrogant Hezbollah is going to be if Iran wins here, or Hamas for that matter. And how poor the PLO will be in contradiction to Hamas. You see the decline of the national movements and the rising of the religious-based movements. PLO is a national movement. We may like it or not, they call it the National Palestinian Movement. Hamas is religious movement, first Muslims. And so are the others. It came to a point where people identified themselves first as Muslims and then as Arabs. It comes to a point where a non-Arab called Ahmadinejad is the bosom friend, the ally of an Arab Lebanese guy called Nasrallah. Something is changing here, and it's not in a good direction. which brings me to the bottom line here on Iran. I do think that if the action that has been started by the United States and others followed on trying to stop Iran from getting nuclear, if it persists, if leadership is shown and resolve is very clear, I think Iran may, at the end of the day, listen to it. Iran is not North Korea. They are not an isolated country, not an autarky. They are part of the world. Their tradition is such. It's a very proud and able nation. And I think they need the world. And as Secretary of State Clinton said, and Secretary of Defense Gates said here, we have early signs that something may be moving there. They will pay a price if they don't go down from that track on which they are now to have military nuclear power. This is an important battle. We see it happening. We see the Arabs crying out for American leadership here. Just saw it being leaked now by the WikiLeaks of yesterday. This is the only game in town about the order in the Middle East and whether we can continue on the track we were on for more stability and more arrangements and more modus vivendi, or we are going in a different direction altogether. When the Palestinians talk with us, they have one eye at us and the other at the Iranian issue. If Iran gets their way, this means a victory for the proxy of Iran, Hezbollah, and the proxy of Iran, Hamas. They don't want to see this happen. Where are we with the Palestinians? Let me say this, when you walk now the streets of Israel, you can think that life is normal, economy is doing great, unemployment is down, growth rate is up, construction goes everywhere. So it is with the Palestinian territory. The economy has grown by 8 to 9% last year. It stands a chance of getting even higher this year. There is no terror for about 2 years. There's good cooperation between us and their security services, and the common enemy called Hamas is the reason for that. There's much more law and order. So we may have the illusion that things can stay the way they are. They cannot, because we don't have a normal situation there. We need to resolve it. What we have with the territories that are in dispute cannot stay like this on end. We don't have a steady state there. So we are in for negotiations which need, hopefully, to resolve this conflict, which is a very difficult, emotionally loaded, historically important conflict for both sides. Because both sides see that land as all theirs, and both sides need to understand that the only way to resolve it is by partition. The same idea that was at the basis of the UN resolution of 1947, even if the borders are not the same, the idea is the same. In Israel, there was a major change, a sea change in public opinion about that. Until 10 to 15 years ago, we were divided in the middle. Half said, all the land is ours. Historically, we need it for our defense even today, so we are going to stay there forever. In the end, the Arab will be part of Israel. This will be one state. The other said, no, we need to give up most of this land that we got into in 1967 in order to get peace. Unfortunately, both visions have been tried and both failed. The idea that we can retain the whole land and stay a democracy and a Jewish state seems not to be working for simple reason, numbers. We may end up in a binational state. It doesn't seem to be working, so Israelis said, we won't go there. And in every poll you see now, 75% of the Israelis say we agree with the two states solution. Israeli prime ministers, one after the other, say this. Even the prime minister of today, Netanyahu, said it about a year ago. We are in for two states. It's a major departure from historic ideological road that our party has taken. I said it, I think, 15 years ago, so I'm in that line anyway, but the party says it now, which is not a simple thing. At the same time, the other camp, the peace camp, so to speak, so they call themselves, tried their version of how to make peace. And it was tried twice. Once Prime Minister Barak went 10 years ago, July 2000, to Camp David with President Clinton and Yasser Arafat. I was there with him in the Israeli delegation. Barak broke many taboos trying to get the end to the conflict. The end was after 14 days and nights in a beautiful place in Maryland. That Clinton was so non-diplomatic as to say, Arafat, you're to blame. Didn't work. The peace camp in Israel felt quite frustrated. This is what we taught the people. If you give everything, you get it. And we didn't. 2 years ago, our previous Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, went even farther than that and offered the Palestinians everything they wanted, or they said they wanted. I don't want to go into details unless you ask later. And Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, didn't say yes, didn't say no, disappeared. Why? Is it because Hamas is threatening? Is it because he cannot ideologically do it? I don't know. But the Israeli peace camp finds itself with very little support from reality, from what people see. So Israelis now are ready to go a very long way in a very deep compromise to have this conflict ended. Provided that we put an end to all claims by building a neighboring state called the State of Palestine for the Arabs who live there. Where are the Palestinians? Can they do it? Are they ready to do it? I leave it open. I don't have a good answer. We are now negotiating the resumption of negotiations with the Palestinians. We were almost there 2 weeks ago, and maybe it was because of the WikiLeaks crisis that the Americans were a little less free with their time to finish this, but I hope that soon enough we'll resume negotiations. I hope we do it both what we call top-down, the final set of issues, finishing the whole thing, and bottom-up, building more and more Palestinian statehood in the making. I hope it will succeed. It's touchy, it's difficult, but it's the only way forward. The last topic I want to touch has to do with a recent topic in the following way. We had two mini wars, I would call them. One in Lebanon in 2006, when the Hezbollah organization attacked us and kidnapped Israelis, and they developed a war, the Second Lebanon War. And the second war, or mini war, was in Gaza almost 2 years ago, after Hamas people kidnapped a soldier. He's still in their hands, Gilad Shalit. And the Israeli government of the day, I wasn't there yet, I was in my wonderful years out of politics, started this war, the Operation Cast Lead in Gaza. In both cases, I must say, the enemies of Israel found a new paradigm of war to which we don't have a simple answer. People don't like to admit it, but I think we need to see what happened here. And I'm afraid that if there is another round of hostilities, they will do the same because it worked for them. What is this new paradigm? What we see is that in these areas now, in Lebanon and Gaza, there are a lot of missiles and rockets deployed. In Lebanon, about 45,000 rockets and missiles are deployed, all aimed at Israel. Think of the number. I don't think there's any European country that has so many rockets and missiles at their disposal or pointed at it. I don't think so. Huge number. They're covering all of Israel. Most of them only in the north of Israel, but some of them all over Israel. In Gaza, there are about 5 or more than 5,000 rockets built by Hamas, all of them with the Iranian help and Syrian help and others who helped them in a secret way all those years. Now you have a new paradigm of war. A lot of rockets and missiles are launched. This is element number one. Element number two, they are launched from within civilian population, on rooftops, in gardens, in houses, in cellars, from within civilian population. They are launched by people who don't wear uniforms. They look like you and me. And they are launched from there on the civilian population in Israel. There's a village called Khan Yunis. Some of you may know it. They launch a rocket, landing at Sderot. The army is not there. Civilians attacking civilians. So you see here the element of many rockets launched by civilians from within civilian population. What do you do now? You want to stop it. You need to hit the launcher. You see the people there around the launcher, they're all civilians. If you do this, inevitably, there will be what we call, taken from law, collateral damage. The law of tort is what was taught by the dean here last year. I take it to, can I say, a more serious arena. People are going to get killed. So what do? There's a moral question here. There's an operational question and a legal question. Morally, I think nobody is supposed to or expected to be a sitting duck and wait for bombs to fall on his head. This is, of course, out of the question. But it's quite clear that if you shoot back, civilians will be killed, because this is where all these launches are deployed. Are you morally justified in doing that? I think yes, but it's an open question, and I leave it here with you. The operational question is something I don't want to go into. It's difficult. It's not easy to find a simple answer, precision-guided munition that hits only that person, not the person sitting or standing 2 or 3 meters away from him. And then there is the international law that is involved here. And let me say something of this. When I was a student of law, which is some decades ago in the University of Jerusalem, the joke was, the saying was that it's clear that there are international law professors. It's not clear that there is international law. This was the idea, public international law. Because, I mean, there's no court, nobody can enforce it, so it's nice norms, but it's not really law, because law is defined by enforcement. Otherwise, it's just a theory or norms of behavior. Well, this has changed, and I think positively. With globalization, so to speak, the local law of a country is not enough. You need international law much more. If you order a book by Amazon, if you sit in Jerusalem ordering it from Amazon in, say, New York, and they send it from Yugoslavia to a Greek ship that sinks, God forbid, in the Mediterranean, on Egyptian water, what is the law? How do you do that? So you need much more, because the world is much more this global village. But even in war and the rules of war, the idea that there are some things that are not allowed in war is of high moral importance. It's very difficult. You fight for your life, for your country, and people tell you, hey, you don't do this. Even if this is the only way to win, you don't do it. Or else you're a war criminal. This is basic in many cultures, and it's very important. It has developed in the beginning of the 20th century, in the Hague Convention, later in the Geneva Convention, especially after the Second World War. And it is very important that people know that even in times of war, there are things that you don't do regarding civilians, regarding the enemy. I don't want to go into all of this. After the new conflicts that we had, especially the one with Gaza, there was a commission set by one of the UN organizations, Human Rights Council, headed by a judge, Professor Richard Goldstone, that attacked us and accused us of crimes, because we tried to defend ourselves and did launch an attack back on those launches. And there are questions that I leave here, because I said I want to leave some questions here, not only answers. What do you do? Is it legitimate or not to attack the attacker, to try to prevent an attack by attacking the launcher, even if you know that civilians that are there because he decided to put them there are going to be hit? This is the basic problem that I unfortunately didn't read much about in the Goldstone report. I don't have simple answers, but the fact that it was not discussed even leaves an uneasy taste in my mouth about this. And as it worked for them, they will do more, and they will do it to others. We sometimes are the first laboratory, but it will be used more and more by non-states who can launch from areas that are not governed by a regular state, like Lebanon, governed by Hezbollah, Hamas, not a state, and so forth. Launch rockets or missiles or tomorrow even unmanned planes that they can launch from some Tora Bora mountains in Pakistan. What do you do if it's done from within civilian population? I think this is something that's worthwhile asking. And I connect the whole thing because if we withdraw further, and I believe if there is a peace agreement between us and Palestinians, we'll have to withdraw from other areas that are very close to our capital, to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, to all the central Israeli population. We need to know that we can defend ourselves if they attack us from there. We left Gaza altogether, even without an agreement. We took from Gaza all the Israelis who lived there, 8,000 people, by force, and said, all right, you have a Palestinian state, we are not there, take it, do something with it. What they did is brought Hamas on them and launched attacks on us. And if, when we defend ourselves, we're accused for doing something that's illegal, what should we do? If we need to withdraw again in order to allow peace to prevail, and there are risks that we need to take, we need to know that by moral standards and international law, we are doing the right thing if we defend ourselves. So I leave these questions, and I want to end with something that I heard when I entered university, as I said, almost 4 decades ago, which is a long time. I remember the first day in the Faculty of Law in Jerusalem, the dean there, who was a professor of Roman law, of all things, said to us, you came here for one thing. Don't accept anything I say, doubt everything. You are here not to accept, but to doubt. You are here mainly to ask questions. The answers come later. So if people take life seriously and not just for the answer that they want to see on TV tonight or tomorrow, I think that important questions need to be asked here. The world is changing, some of it for the better, some of it for the worse. The paradigm of war is changing. The question of nations and religions are getting maybe into a changed phase. So we need to look at this change in the world and try to understand them in time and give good answers. The state of Israel finds itself in a very, should I say, interesting part of the world. We have neighbors that are not Canada and Mexico, put it this way. We are ready for the exchange. If you want to take Syria and give us Canada, we'll do that. But I'm not sure that you'll do it happily. And we have neighbors that are who they are, and we are looking ahead and see a lot of risks, dangers if you like, challenges. But if we need to understand things really deeply, we need to look in a perspective. And looking back on those 63 years from November 29th, 1947, the UN resolution, and then the year later, the Israeli Declaration of Independence, starting from zero, 600,000 Jews in that land, with so many millions of Arabs around, not accepting our very right to exist as a nation, barely having enough to eat or to fight, and where we are today, with 10 times that number of people, about almost 6 million Jews in Israel and 1.5 million Arabs, making the state of Israel, with the defense capabilities that are recognized all over the world, with very high scientific capabilities, with culture, with economy that's doing quite well. So I think that if you take things into perspective, you should know that the fact that there are challenges that look unsurmountable, impossible, does mean that they are unsurmountable, impossible. We will solve them. Only we need to do it thinking anew, finding new ways, being ahead of the other side, trying to broaden the camp of stability and peace, and stop the way of extremism, fundamentalism, and radicalism that we see developing. So both the Iranian issue, casting a giant shadow over the whole Middle East, and the Palestinian issue are main topics that we are dealing with in our political system, in our society. And while doing that, we continue with building our state, quite proudly of what we have done. And I came here to share these thoughts and these challenges with you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have on these issues. Please.
So we do have some time for questions. Let me ask you to please come to the microphone if possible. And again, I will be watching my watch. Yes, we can begin over here.
I have a twofold question. What are the chances of making a separate peace treaty with Syria? And secondly, what are the chances of Hamas taking over the West Bank if there isn't a peace, if there isn't progress in the peace movement?
I'll answer you briefly. The first answer is my opinion, not the government opinion. You need to draw a distinction. I think, and I say it for years, we should speak with Syria. We didn't. The Americans were very much against our talking with Syria. I heard it in my own ears. Words like, they are helping the terrorists, are you going to talk with them? I think it was a mistake. I think that Syria was in deep trouble with the Hariri case over their head. They were quite isolated in the Arab world. And I think this is the right time to negotiate. Now they feel somewhat stronger with the alliance with Iran. They are not a nice regime. See what they do in Lebanon. I still think it's important to try to talk with them. Can we reach peace with them? The price is heavy. I think we should try it. If we can cut Syria away from Iran and destroy this northern alliance, we do an important thing. We need the Americans on this, that they will come to us if America is with us. They need America more than they need us. I'm for it. The government hasn't decided yet, so I don't speak for the government on this. I think we should do it. On the Palestinian track, Hamas, it's not clear at all. It may happen both ways. When we left Gaza in a peace move, the result was Hamas took over. So I don't know that if we leave, Hamas will take over, or if we stay, Hamas take over. I don't know. This is a big fight within the Palestinian camp, between the national camp and the religious camp. It has to do with the entire Muslim world, where you see these two forces fighting. Hamas says Israel will not exist. It's theoretically, religiously against our dogma. With them, you can have truce, you can have a ceasefire, you can't have peace. So it's our interest that Hamas does not get to power and that PLO is strong enough to make an agreement.
I'm going to go across the room. Jerry, I saw you had a hand, and I think you might have a tricky time getting to the microphone from where you are, so please speak up loudly.
I apologize, I can't stand. Welcome.
Thank you.
Two-parter, if I may, quick one. One, you speak in the name of yourself. I wonder how you deal with Avigdor Lieberman and his stance within the government when you're within the government, number one. And then if I could ask an internal question.
This was not internal. What was this?
Having to do with things within Israel.
Yeah.
Which you haven't had a chance to talk about that one particular subject. I wanted to comment about the power, the increasing power of religious Orthodox, the Haredim and the like, chief rabbinate, and how that increases upon what do you think is happening internally to Israel within.
Well, one thing I shouldn't do, I shouldn't say things here that will collapse the coalition at home. So you're touching on two pillars of this coalition that you need to understand me now when I say what I'm going to say. Well, I can tell you a secret. I didn't vote for Lieberman. I voted Likud. I have different views on the world, on life, on human rights. This is me. But in the coalition government that we have, it's our system, you take what you can get. I very much want Kadima to join the government, which will make us, give us more freedom to maneuver inside and outside. The basic values of Zionism to me is more Kadima, Likud, and Labour, and I would rather be with that big coalition. But I have to remind you that when Kadima was trying to get the government, Lieberman was part of their partners because they couldn't do without him. The Israeli public gave him 15 seats in the Knesset, which is quite substantial. So every one of us does his best to get his way. And so far we are going with the two-state idea and hopefully for negotiation to be resumed. So I did what I could do. I don't want to go in any further on that. On the religious issue, it's a different story. Again, an interesting story. I don't have enough time to go over it, but when I spoke of the revival of religion in politics, there is one country, I don't remember where it is, the evangelist movement are quite strong. You might have heard of this. Not in Europe. There are the revival of religion in politics in many parts of the world. Not in Europe, by the way. The Muslim world, yes, in American parts, and in, unfortunately, the Jewish world, let us not forget the man who killed Yitzhak Rabin was a Jewish fundamentalist. A man who thought that it's the Torah, he understands the halakha for which he did what he did, shamefully. So I don't want to compare this to anything else in the Jewish world, the extreme one case. This is not the issue here. But you have religious parties in Israel. The number is not growing that much in the Knesset. There's a change within the religious parties, less the national religious movement, more the Haredi movement. But the overall number is not changing that much. They do some 20-something members of the Knesset. This is, I think, more or less what they have, but maybe a little more than that, 21, 22. And they are part of coalitions. If the coalition will be bigger and will not rely only on them, their power will be somewhat diminished. But I cannot say more for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your challenging comments. You left us with more questions than answers. But
this is the academia. This is why we're here.
If you had a private room with President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, you said that the U.S. must do a lot vis-a-vis Iran. What would you ask them to do?
Hoping that what I say to them will not be cabled later to an embassy. Well, I think that what they have been doing in the last year is good. I think it was somewhat late, with all due respect, until they got how important it is for America. Because the standing of America in the world will be determined here, not only the Middle East. And I think that if they can continue with that, with the persistence and the leadership and the resolve. If I were to advise the president, and he doesn't need me for that, I would ask him, I would advise him maybe to go on television, which he does very well anyway, and talk to the Iranians in leadership and tell them in a very few sentences, if not more, doesn't need more than that. Listen very carefully, you are not going to get nuclear. That's all. And I think then you need to continue and have the coalition that is now built. Russia is on board. China somewhat reluctantly has agreed part of the way. If you can get India on board, they are not yet very much there. The Western countries in Europe, their rhetoric is much better than the Americans. The D's not always match their rhetoric in Europe, but the trade volume of Europe, of France, of Germany, of Italy with Iran is quite heavy. There's a lot that can be done in terms of continuing the pressure on Iran and having a higher and higher price being paid by them if they don't step down from this track. I think this can work. And I don't want to speak of other alternatives because it's not for me to say it.
Thank you.
Let's move back over here.
Thank you. You indicated that the question of firing into civilian areas from Israel when there are weapons near the civilian areas is a difficult one, and the Goldstone report didn't help because apparently international law is extremely vague or ambiguous or non-existent on the question. Do you think it's in Israel's interest to be involved with some international effort, maybe with the United States, with the UN, with other countries, even with the International Court of Justice, to try to come up with such rules so you'll know what the boundaries are for future, particularly because of the two-country problem, making it even more complicated?
Yeah, I think yes. There are two approaches here. Many people, not only in Israel, say, forget about it, nobody will listen, hide what you do. In old days, in the last several thousands of years, until 20, 30 years ago, wars were waged and held when nobody saw them. People could say live in Paris in 1812 when Napoleon was fighting the Russians, and they didn't see war. They waited for Napoleon to come back in the way he came, understanding he lost the war, or maybe wait for Tolstoy to write The War and Peace and see how the war looked like. But nobody saw war. Second World War. America was fighting in Europe. Nobody, or in Japan, nobody saw the horrors of war. Not what was done in Dresden, not what was done in Tokyo, and I'm not accusing anybody. So war went on, and in the end people looked for what happened. One of the changes of our time, and we live in a time of paradigm changes in many ways, is that war is seen on television real time, and you can't stop it. The first reaction is censorship. It won't work. My kid, your kid, has a cell phone, and he takes the picture and clicks back home to the editorial board of whatever. So wars are seen. When wars are seen, they are ugly. People die. They are orphans. They are widows. It's always ugly. And you lose perspective. The guy who died, who is he? A Nazi officer, an American soldier, an Israeli? You don't know. You see a tragedy. So wars that are seen need to be waged and handled differently. It's not only that you should have better way to explain the war. Nobody listens. Words, people don't listen to. There are images, footage, and this is what makes you make you think you understand the world. So I think that in international law it becomes more efficient now, because there is the International Criminal Court of the Rome Convention of 2002, and there is the universal jurisdiction of countries that try other people on other crimes. And there are courts that are established by the United Nations Security Council, like the Yugoslavia Court, the Rwanda Court. So international law that I mentioned earlier, we thought doesn't exist, has teeth today. An American soldier will never be brought to The Hague, or a Russian. An Israeli may be brought to The Hague, and nobody can help him if he's not there. So we have an interest, not in hiding, but in making public, and showing what the problem is, as I did today, and say, let's try to solve it together. In the Geneva Convention, high contracting powers, in the Amnesty International, in the United Nations, in UCLA Law School, in Harvard Law School, in Cambridge and Oxford. I think we should speak of the problems, that people will deal with them. We cannot, it's not a parliament of the world that makes decisions, it's a process. And I think we should make the problems being known, and we should speak of them and try to, not to change the law. The law is all right. The interpretation of the law and the adaptation of the law to the reality. What is proportionality in that new situation needs to be interpreted in the right way, not in the wrong way. But I'm for doing it publicly and openly.
As a quick interim comment, let me commend you on your less than 60-second questions and just remind you to continue in that vein. And we'll move again to this side of the room.
Thank you very much. It was inspiring listening to you. Very briefly, there is a slight twofold question. With the incredible, let's say, positive vision of Israel, particularly in America for the most part, and in the world, we're getting this sort of rising anti-Semitism focused around very much Gaza and what we get on our news here, which is infringement of the settlements in the Old City. And we just had that on our news. And it comes to my thought very instantly, for public relations, why don't we just make peace with Gaza, have a massive, with education, we have educators here from Palestine talking about the problems. This is a university. So if we can have, why don't we just get those two problems solved? And why are we going into the Old City and resettling the Arab houses? These questions, why don't we solve these problems?
Well, I'll answer again briefly. It's much deeper and broader than I can touch, but I'll try to do justice to your questions that are important questions. Gaza. I think that there was not much wisdom in the policy that was even started by a previous government trying to withhold from Gaza certain products. I think it wouldn't have worked. We stopped it. It was, I think, a mistake. But there is a question here that was put by many people, and of course they wouldn't admit it, by the PLO people. If you treat Gaza as you treat the PLO, legitimizing the Hamas, that may be a very heavy blow to the PLO. The only thing the PLO can sell the people is that we are legitimate, the world recognizes us, talk with us. Hamas said Israel will not exist. In the end, Israel will be out because it's Allah and the God of Allah and the law of Allah. If you treat them, I don't speak of harassing them, but if you legitimize them, making peace with them, saying, yes, this is Palestine as well, the chance of getting peace is really nil. And it's a very difficult problem because when they show Gaza and they make a whole story out of it and say, why don't you let the Gazans do more and make them legitimate? It sounds wonderful, but one needs to think one step ahead. Egypt, of course, doesn't accept it because they are afraid of Gaza being fundamentalist because of this spillover to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which are a big threat to their regime. It's their neighbor. So what do we do with that? I don't have a good answer, a simple answer. Gaza is a big problem for us, more so for the Palestinians. Making them legitimate partners maybe puts an end to the main contention of the PLO. We are, they say, the sole representative of the Palestinian people. If there are two representatives, there won't be peace. So I leave the question with you again. I don't have a good answer here. We do what we can, but we try to balance it. We don't want to harass them, let them have as good life as they want, but legitimate partner, they are not. As long as they say Israel will not exist, we do not respect any agreement signed by the PLO, and we do not renounce the use of violence. This is what they say. So they are not partners because of what they stand for, what they say and what they do. Jerusalem is a different story altogether. Jerusalem is a city of about 2/3 Jews and 1/3 Arabs in the city of today, the United Jerusalem. If you are there, I lived there all my life, you don't see just on the screen, you see that it is not, the city doesn't look like it is on the screen because life is very normal there. There are some incidents, some cases. I think that we should not, two things I need to say. One cannot tell somebody don't buy an apartment here because you are Arab or you are Jew. Not in Los Angeles, not in Jerusalem. If an Arab wants to buy an apartment in a Jewish neighborhood, you can't tell him you don't do that. Or the other way around. This is something that is, I don't need to explain why. You can't do that. You don't do it in any other city in Israel, in Haifa or in Akko. You don't do that. Government doesn't do it. The government doesn't sell houses or plant Jews within Arabs or Arabs within Jews. We try to keep neighborhoods as they are, but we cannot by law stop it. There are some groups that do want to settle. I don't think it's smart. I don't think it helps within areas that are almost exclusively on the other side. I don't think it's smart. We need to do it much more reasonably and not look for troubles. And I hope that we find ways to do it. We had some cases that we could have done without, and I think there were some mistakes here, but the problem is deeper than that. The question is the political question of Jerusalem. What will be the fate of Jerusalem in the negotiations? This is a tough one. We don't have, I think, a simple answer to that. Because not only the religious side, Jerusalem is sacred to all three monotheistic religions, that's not a problem. It has never been a national capital of any people but the Jewish people. No Arab ever made it the capital city. And now they want to make it the capital city. It's a big issue and it's not a simple one, one of the toughest issues on the negotiations table. It's still ahead of us. In the meantime, we need to lead decent life with equality and fair chances for everybody in Jerusalem. And if you come there, I don't know when you've been the last, you see that for most cases this is the case, this is the rule. There are some cases where we should do better.
First of all, I want to thank you for your principled analysis and your wisdom. And I want to know what you can say about human rights beyond interests and the role that it plays in Israel's agenda and the role it should play in a Jewish worldview. And within this question of human rights, you talked about collateral damage, and you raised moral questions. So the dilemma that I have is, at what point, when you know that there will be civilian deaths, and you're certain, and you have seen time after time that such and such a behavior, military behavior, results in civilian deaths, does it cease to be an accident? In other words, is there a limit morally to claiming, I didn't mean it, And I really care about, in other words, it goes along, by the way, with the pronunciation that I care about morality. So is sometimes there's a bit of cynicism one senses in the claim when the reality is that we know what the result is going to be, and there might be a different way of dealing with the problem, even militarily, than shooting a missile or dropping a bomb.
All right, the first part of the question is a broad issue. Human rights in general, it's of course for another trip to Los Angeles, and I can give a course on this. I hope if they will accept me here, but I can't do it that brief. But let me say this. There always should be a balance stricken between national issues and human rights issues or personal issues. Some balance between the individuals and the nation, in every nation.
Mm-hmm.
What is the balance really tells you what regime you have. My way of life, my Weltanschauung, my understanding of life is that human rights, that the individual is the center of everything. The states are built for people, not people for states. And in most cases, I would stand with the individual, not with the state. But there is a limit to that, of course, because if the state doesn't defend itself, doesn't take care of basic issues like helping the poor, taking from the rich, there are things that are against equality, and we are for them. Or defending the country, defending your homeland. Sometimes you are required to risk your life, sometimes to give your life away, not intentionally, because you defend your country, in every country. So what the balance is a big question always. Usually in times of war, nations don't give enough weight to civil rights. Let me remind you of some Japanese in this country in the Second World War, or German passport bearers in England in the Second World War that were all detained, although some of them were Jews as well. And I don't want to speak of Guantanamo and other ideas that you might have heard of, where countries, when in war, are doing things that later they're ashamed of, I think. The problem with us is that we, unlike America, we are in a constant war, off and on for 60-something years. And if we maintain the same level as America keeps in times of war, it's going to be very bad. So we need to do much better than that, because we are always in such a conflict. So the fight for human rights in times of conflict is an important fight. Very unpopular, but very important. And I do my share. It's not easy. Now on your question of whether to launch an attack or a rocket where civilians are going to be killed, you said in the last sentence, maybe you can find another way to do it. This is the answer. If there is another way to do it, don't launch a rocket. If there's any other way but to do what may eventually kill civilians, don't do this, because you don't kill civilians.
Even if it endangers
if there is another option to deal with it. The question is, I mean, this is something we can all agree on. The problem is that it is deeper than that, tougher than that. What if you are in the decision-making position, and there's only one way to stop this specific attack, to launch a rocket or send a missile or a plane to drop a bomb on a certain place where you know that it's very high probability that civilians will be killed. But there's no other way to stop the attack on your country, on your city, on your civilians. This is the tough problem. Now, I don't want to run away from it, to shy away and say, no, that we'll have it another way. If there is another way, don't do it. What if there is no other way? And this is what they do. Now, I think, by the way, that if you speak of international law, I would have considered deploying such weapons within civilian population a war crime, even what they do now. It's not a war crime today, but if you say what you do now in the cities of Tyre and Sidon in Lebanon, or in Marjayoun or Klea, all the villages in South Lebanon, or in Gaza or Khan Yunis or Rafah, that you deploy those rockets in a way that we will have to launch an attack on them and kill your civilians, what you do now is a war crime. This is something that needs to be considered.
Let me quickly apologize in advance, by the way, because we are going to run out of time. Our guest has another appointment to get to after this. We'll take one more question, and if we have time after that, we'll take one more following that. But this may be our last question. Please.
Thank you.
That was hint to me to be short in my answer. Okay.
I pray there'll be peace in our time, and I believe in miracles, and especially in the Middle East. So my two short questions, the first one being, how important do you feel it is for the Palestinians to stop honouring and naming streets after people that murdered Jews? And how important is it for Abbas to stop showing a map of Palestine that doesn't allow for Israel in it in terms of negotiations? And also, what do you see as coming from the Palestinian side that shows that what are they willing to give up or to do for peace other than stop killing us?
Okay. Of course, I agree on all those items. Let me put it. I agree that he shouldn't do this and that. Let me say two more things. First, there is a term that is used quite frequently by the international community, confidence-building measures. That we need to do things to build confidence with the other side. I'm all for it, but they need to do the same. Because they lost the confidence of the Israeli peace camp, not the warriors, the right wing, the extremists, no. The peace camp, even those who are ready to give up a lot, do not believe that they mean what they say. I say generally, I may exaggerate it. And I think there are certain things that they can do to show that they are serious about peace. About putting, not peace, putting an end to the conflict. Let me say the following, which I think is important. When you reach the end of the negotiation, we are there maybe because we've done a lot until now. We are already there, the end game, if they can do it. There comes the time for the tough resolution, for the tough decisions. Let me define tough and easy decision, or light decision for leaders. I'll do it in a provocative way. An easy decision is the one that your people support. Go to war, everybody supports you, for some days at least. Some days, everybody, Vietnam, in the beginning, everybody supports you. This is easy for a leader. A tough one is to do things that your voters don't like, but you are sure is right for you in the long term. I'll give you an example. Begin Sadat, 77, took decision that people didn't believe they will do. Sadat accepted that Israel. Begin gave up all of Sinai. If both of them would have gone to the polls and asked the voters, 90% would be against it. I remember the Labour Party speaking against it. I think so. I remember the Labour Party and in Begin's time. Labour was left of Labour. Moshe Dayan saying, better have Sharm el-Sheikh without peace or not peace without Sharm el-Sheikh. And they were leaders who said, I'm taking a tough decision. The one that my supporters, my voters don't like, but I know it's good for the country. And if it's a good one, in the end, they all supported him. Sadat did the same. Rabin and Hussein with the Oslo. I didn't like the Oslo agreement. I voted against Oslo. I thought it was a mistake. But it was a courageous decision because the people didn't like it and you said it's right for the people. So when Netanyahu, our Prime Minister of the day, went on Bar Ilan University and said we are going for a Palestinian state, it was a very high political risk he took. It was against his political interest. This is a tough decision. I didn't theory at the Palestinian side taking tough decisions on the end game. Like a simple thing. If Mr. Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas, whom I know and I met many times, even at my home, will say tomorrow morning, simple thing, when we have a Palestinian state, we will not demand that refugees will go to Israel. If he says this, he changes the world for us. This means we have an end of the story, end of claims. No more claims after. When they say, no, after you have a state, we have a state, we'll still have what they call the right to return to Israel, we know that we are in one more phase in an ongoing conflict. If he says this, now to say it's tough, he will be called a traitor by his people because the PLO was built for that, not for the territories. There were no territories. So before 67. This is a tough decision. So if we come to the end of the road now, I hope we are there, they'll have to take some tough decisions. They can't get 100% of what they want. They may not like us, we may not like them, but we live one near the other. We can make it if both parties go down from the high, beautiful, rosy dreams to reality and know they can't get 100% of what they want. This is what we need from leaders now, and let's see if they do it. Now the last one that promised. Yeah. Yes.
Just a very quick one. You mentioned you like to read in passing, but you didn't actually say what the current view is. It's one of these things that flashes up in the media in Israel, around the world frequently. Around the world doesn't seem to be doing much good. So what's your personal view on what Israel gives up to bring a soldier home?
Well, unfortunately, it's not good for the last question not to answer you fully, but I don't want to go into details. We try not to. There's a family here, and the negotiations or the contacts that have been made are kept quite secret. It's a tough question, Countries usually don't give that many. We have been giving hundreds for one. America never did that, nor any other country in the West. It was a precedent, it was set by previous governments. They can say it's because of sensitivity, our traditional sensitivity to human life, and I'm proud of it. Only don't make a mistake, there's a price to pay for this. Those that may be freed from prison may go back to terror. This happened in the past. So it's a tough dilemma. I have my position, don't want to go into it. We have a small ministerial group that deals with that, headed by the Prime Minister. My position is clearly stated there. I don't do it outside. I don't want to be the bad guy or the good guy, whatever my position is. I don't want to say it. I hope we'll find the solution soon enough, but the fact that the man is over 4 years in their captivity and hasn't been seen for once by the Red Cross, let alone get home, seen by the Red Cross, which is a war crime in itself, says something about our neighbors. And this is the Hamas. Somebody asked me about Hamas. Let them lead good life and not show one sign of life by the UN or by the Red Cross or by Amnesty International, by anybody. As I said, give us the Canadians. Take our neighbors. Well, thank